Welcome to Golden Billionaire Stories. Before we begin, please subscribe, like, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next powerful story.
Obiora,
The gate had not
look
even
at you
finished
washing
sliding
common
open
blouse.
before the
A
shouting
whole
started.
man like you, doing
Later,
woman's work.
people who
There
were
is
there
no
that
shame
night
in
would
caring
argue
for my
about
own
which
home.
part came first: the scream, the crash of a champagne tray, or the moment
Obiora, what
security
is this?
formed a
Are you now
human
a
wall
houseboy?
around a small
There
boy
is no
in a
shame
blue
in
school
caring for my
uniform,
wife, sister.
his
God
arms
forbid,
wrapped
this is not our
protectively
culture.
around a black lacquered box. Some would swear
almost
they
done.
heard a woman faint near the dessert table.
It is not
Others
a
would
problem
insist
at all.
it was the band that gave it away first, the drummer's hands freezing mid-beat when he recognized the surname stitched discreetly into the collar of the visiting security detail's jackets. What everyone agreed on without exception was this: by the time the dust settled, a man in a simple white kaftan, the same man 300 guests had spent the entire evening quietly mocking, the man they'd called a houseboy, a kept husband, a disgrace to a good family's name, was standing in the doorway of the grandest reception hall in Ikoyi, and every single one of them was on their feet, frozen, unable to look away. To understand how a Tuesday afternoon of dirty laundry led to this moment, you have to go back 5 days. But that was later. This story begins somewhere much smaller, in a 2-bedroom flat in Agudu, on an ordinary Tuesday, with a man named Obiora Ekwueme bent over a plastic basin, scrubbing his wife's blouse by hand because the washing machine had developed a habit of eating buttons. Obiora, is that you kneeling on the floor washing another woman's clothes? He did not need to look up. He knew that voice, Ifeanyi, his wife's older sister, the kind of woman who announced her arrival before she reached the gate. "Good afternoon, Ife," he said, not breaking rhythm. "Don't good afternoon me. Where is my sister?" "At the office. She has a client meeting." Ifeanyi stepped further into the compound, her husband Douglas trailing behind her with the particular smugness of a man who had never once in his marriage touched a broom. She looked at the basin, at Obiora's rolled-up sleeves, at the line of drying wrappers strung across the balcony, and her mouth curled the way it always did when she had decided, once again, that her sister had married beneath herself. "So this is what you do all day, washing panties." They needed washing. And cooking, sweeping, taking that child to school. Someone has to. "Wonderful," Ifeanyi said, turning to Douglas as though presenting evidence in a trial. "A whole-grown man, a house husband." "It's called being a father," Obiora said quietly, wringing the blouse and hanging it without heat in his voice. "Adaeze works hard. When she comes home, I want her to meet peace, not more work." "And what does she get from you? A cook, a cleaner, a houseboy with a wedding ring?" Obiora finally looked up. There was no anger in his eyes, which somehow made Ifeanyi's face tighten further. "She gets a husband who is here," he said. "That is what she gets." "You married her for free food," Ifeanyi snapped. "Everybody in this family says it. I'm only brave enough to say it to your face." "Believe whatever helps you sleep, Ife." Douglas, who had been silent until now, finally found his voice, puffing his chest slightly the way men do when they mistake volume for authority. "In my house, my wife doesn't lift a finger. That is how a real man runs a home. He provides. He doesn't kneel over a basin." "Is that so?" Obiora said mildly, not looking up. "I built 2 properties in Magodo before I turned 35. What exactly have you built, Obiora? A laundry schedule." "Douglas," Ifeanyi said, though there was no real correction in it, more pride than warning. "I'm only saying what everyone already thinks," Douglas pressed on. "A man who stays home while his wife hustles in Lagos traffic every single day, that isn't a marriage. That's charity." Obiora straightened slowly, wiped his hands on the towel slung over his shoulder, and regarded his brother-in-law with an expression that was somehow both patient and faintly amused. The look of a man who had heard a particular joke many times and no longer found it sharp enough to wound him. "Charity," he repeated. "Interesting word for a household where nobody goes to bed hungry, nobody's clothes go unwashed, and a 5-year-old has never once cried himself to sleep because both his parents were too tired to notice him crying. If that's charity, Douglas, I'd recommend it to every man in this family. Douglas opened his mouth, found nothing immediately available to say, and closed it again. "Let's go," Ekwueme muttered, tugging her husband's sleeve, suddenly eager to leave. "This one will never change." "I don't intend to," Obiora said pleasantly, already turning back toward the basin. She scoffed, turned on her heel, and marched back to the gate, Douglas scurrying behind her like a poorly trained dog. Obiora watched them go, then returned to the basin, humming something under his breath, unbothered or at least appearing so, which was its own kind of quiet strength. A neighbor's child, 7-year-old Blessing from the flat upstairs, wandered into the compound just then, drawn by the sound of the gate and the promise of company. She perched on the low wall beside the basin, swinging her legs. "Uncle Obi, why does that woman always shout at you?" "Because shouting makes some people feel bigger, Blessing." "Does it work?" He laughed, a real laugh, the tension of the last 10 minutes draining out of him at once. "Not that I've noticed. Go and wash your hands. Your mother said you should come home before dark." "Yes, Uncle Obi." She hopped down and scampered off, and Obiora returned to the wash, the compound quiet again, the only sound the wet slap of fabric against his palms, and somewhere down the street, a hawker calling out the evening's last groundnuts. Adaeze heard about the visit before she even got her shoes off. "Your sister came again," Obiora said, meeting her at the door with a plate of jollof rice and a cold bottle of malt already sweating on the table. "What did she want this time?" "To remind me that I am a disgrace to the family." Adaeze sighed, dropped her bag, and sank into the dining chair. "I'm sorry, love, I'll speak to her." "You don't have to defend me every time." "I know I don't have to," she said, pulling him down into the seat beside her. "I choose to." He smiled faintly, tired in the particular way that comes from being underestimated by people who claim to love you. "Ask your husband," she muttered to herself, imagining the future confrontation. "That's what I would say if I asked what happened. Ask your husband," as if a man cooking dinner is a crime scene. "It might as well be, in your father's eyes." That silenced her for a moment. She looked at him, really looked, the way she used to when they were dating and everyone told her she was making a mistake, that a man with no visible job and no interest in growing was not a serious prospect for a woman as sharp as she was. "5 years," she said finally. 5 years, Obi. In that time, you have never once raised your voice at me. You have never disappeared when the business almost collapsed. You sat with me at 2 in the morning going through invoices when I wanted to give up. You have never touched me in anger. You have never insulted me to make yourself look bigger in front of other men." "Adaeze, let me finish. When Tobina has a fever at midnight, who is awake with him? You. When I am too exhausted to think, who listens without needing me to perform for him? You. If loving a man who cooks and cleans and shows up every single day without fail makes me a fool in my family's eyes, then I am the happiest fool in Lagos." Obiora reached for her hand across the table, saying nothing, because there was nothing left to add. If you would want a partner who shows up for you like Obiora shows up for Adaeze, drop a raising hands in the comments right now. And if this story is already pulling you in, hit subscribe. We're building something real here, and we want you with us till the very end. 3 days later, Ekwueme returned, this time with a different mission entirely. "Papa's birthday is Saturday," she announced, standing in the doorway like she expected to be thanked for the reminder. "I know my own father's birthday, Ife. The whole family will be there, everyone who matters." Adaeze folded her arms. "Say what you came to say." Ekwueme glanced toward the kitchen, where Obiora was quietly plating leftovers, pretending not to listen. "Papa doesn't want him there." The silence that followed had weight to it. "If my husband is not welcome," Adaeze said slowly, "then neither am I." Don't make this difficult, Adaeze. I'm not making anything difficult. You walked into my home to tell me my husband cannot attend his father-in-law's birthday. That's not me being difficult. That's you being cruel. You know how Papa feels about him. That's Papa's problem, not mine. Ekwueme hesitated, and in that hesitation, Adaeze knew there was more coming. There's another reason, Ekwueme said finally. Kingsley Obiora is coming. Kingsley, Adaeze repeated flatly. He's single again. Papa invited him because he thinks maybe you two could talk. Talk about what? I have a husband. Don't pretend you don't understand what I'm saying. I understand perfectly, Adaeze said, her voice low and dangerous now. You're telling me my own father is trying to introduce me to another man at his birthday party, while I am married. Papa believes you made a mistake, Ekwueme pressed on, undeterred. You were the brightest one of all of us, Adaeze. You built a whole business from nothing. Men with real prospects wanted you, and you chose this. A man who spends his afternoons washing underwear. Be careful, Ekwueme. I'm only telling you the truth. Kingsley has money, real estate and oil servicing company, connections in 3 states. He can give you the kind of life you deserve. I already have the life I want, Adaeze said, standing now, her voice trembling with restrained fury. A man who is present. A man who chose me back every single day for 5 years without needing an audience to prove it. You call that wasted. I call it chosen. She turned toward the kitchen doorway where Obiora stood watching, dish towel still in hand, saying nothing, because in that moment nothing needed to be said. Ekwueme let herself out. That night after Tobina was asleep and the flat had gone quiet, Adaeze found her husband in the storage room behind their bedroom, kneeling in front of an old metal box she rarely thought about. The one he called, half-jokingly, his treasure chest. Where did you even bring that thing out from? She asked, leaning in the doorway. I feel like I haven't seen it in years. It's always been here, he said, not looking up. I just don't open it often. Are you looking for something? Your father's birthday. I want to give him something. She crossed her arms, half smiling despite herself. Please don't. Why not? You know my father. If you give him something modest, he will spend the entire party complaining that his son-in-law brought him cheap, gold-plated nonsense. It isn't gold-plated. Here we go. I'm serious, Adaeze. It's solid gold. Solid gold, she repeated, folding her arms tighter, amused now rather than annoyed. And where exactly did you acquire solid gold, Obiora? There's a private jeweler. He doesn't take new clients easily. I've known him a long time. Of course you have. I'm telling you the truth. How much did this mysterious private jeweler charge you? I don't remember. You don't remember spending money on solid gold from a jeweler who supposedly doesn't take clients, and you don't remember the price. It wasn't important. She laughed, the tired, fond laugh of a woman who had long ago decided her husband's stories, however strange, were part of the furniture of their marriage and not worth fighting over. Sometimes I wonder where you get these tailies from, Obi. They're not tailies. Getting a loan from a private bank in this country is nearly impossible, and yet you speak like you know the men who own them personally. I do know them. Chindu Akanji works for me, he added, almost absently, referring to a name she vaguely recalled from television, some businessman who occasionally appeared on financial news segments. Do you hear yourself right now? Every word. And this necklace you're about to produce, also worth millions, I assume. It is. She sat down on the edge of the bed, shaking her head, though something in his calm, unbothered certainty made her pause longer than usual. I don't care whether it's real gold or costume jewelry, Obi. If you hand me something that costs 1,000 naira, I'll wear it. If you hand me something worth 1 million, I'll wear that too. What matters is that you gave it. Then trust me on this. You are a strange man. I know. Leave your father-in-law's gift to me. I'll pick something up in the morning. A watch, maybe a nice agbada. You don't need to. I know I don't need to. I can handle it. You've already handled 50 things today, he said gently. You cooked. You picked Tobina up. You closed 2 client deals on the phone while stirring soup with your other hand. Let me handle 1 birthday gift. Something in his tone, steady, certain, entirely without the usual pleading, made her look at him differently for just a moment. Then he reached into a drawer and pulled out a folded card, sealed, with handwriting she didn't recognize as his usual scrawl. What is that? Authorization. For what? Tomorrow morning, before you take Tobina to school, stop by Crown Meridian Bank on Azumba Mbadio. Ask the front desk for the branch director. Give them this. Chindu, I am not walking into a bank and asking for the director like I own the place. You won't need to say much, just hand them the card. And if security calls the police on me for trying to bribe my way past reception, they won't. You want me to walk into Crown Meridian Bank, one of the biggest banks in this country, holding a handwritten note, and expect them to simply let me in? Yes. I don't understand you sometimes. You don't have to understand it, just try it. No, thank you. Adaeze. No, I'll buy Papa a nice watch, a good suit, something normal, something that doesn't require security clearance. He didn't argue further. He simply placed the card on the dresser, kissed her forehead, and went to check on Tobina, leaving her staring at the folded paper with an unease she couldn't quite name. Adaeze lay awake long after Obiора's breathing had settled into sleep, the folded card still sitting on the dresser where he'd left it, catching a thin line of streetlight through the curtains. Part of her wanted to laugh the whole thing off as one of his harmless, elaborate stories, the kind he'd told since the day they met, about knowing bank chairmen and television businessmen, stories she'd long ago decided were simply part of his charm, a private joke whose punchline she'd stopped waiting for. But another part of her, smaller and harder to name, kept circling back to the stillness in his voice when he'd said it. He didn't sound like a man telling a joke. He sounded like a man being careful. She didn't decide anything that night. She simply told herself, drifting finally toward sleep, that Emeka could stop by the bank on the way to school, and if nothing came of it, she would never have to know she'd almost believed him. Morning arrived in its usual scramble, eggs on the stove, a school bag by the door, a small boy chanting his own name to himself for no reason other than the joy of being 5 and mostly indestructible. Tobina, breakfast is ready. Coming, Mummy. Homework inside the bag. Yes, Mummy. Water bottle. Yes. Good boy, Uncle Emeka is outside. In the car, Tobina sat with his school bag on his lap and tucked beside it the folded card his father had pressed into his hand that morning with strict instructions. Give this to nobody but the branch director. Tell them Daddy sent you. Uncle Emeka, Tobina said solemnly from the back seat, we have to stop at Daddy's bank first. Daddy's bank? Which bank, young master? Crown Meridian. And what business do you have there this morning? Collecting something. From who? The branch director. Emeka glanced in the rearview mirror, unsure whether to laugh. Did your mother approve this? Daddy told her. Did your father tell me about it? No. Still, there was something in the boy's flat, unbothered certainty, the same unbothered certainty his father always carried, that made Emeka hesitate before dismissing it outright. We'll stop for a few minutes, he said finally, then straight to school after. The lobby of Crown Meridian Bank was all marble and hush, the kind of quiet that made small children either behave perfectly or misbehave spectacularly. Tobina did neither. He simply walked to the front desk, school bag still slung over one shoulder, and announced, in the clearest voice a 5-year-old could summon, "Good morning. My daddy said I should see the branch director." The receptionist blinked. "I'm sorry, the branch director." "Yes, ma'am." "And you are whose child exactly?" "Daniel, no." He corrected himself the way children do when nervous. "Obiora Ekwueme." "Do you have an appointment, young man?" He produced the folded card with the solemnity of a diplomat handing over credentials. The receptionist opened it, read 3 lines, and her professional composure cracked just slightly at the edges. "Please wait 1 moment," she said, and picked up the internal line with a speed that suggested this was not, in fact, a normal Tuesday morning inquiry. Within minutes, a small crowd had gathered behind the reception desk, a floor manager, a security supervisor, and finally a man in a sharply tailored suit who introduced himself, with visible nervousness, as Mr. Adaeze, the branch director. "This card," he said carefully, holding it as though it might combust, "carries an authorization code that requires direct verification." He dialed a number written at the bottom of the card. The call connected almost instantly. "This is Adaeze at the Azumba Mbadiu branch," he said, his voice noticeably tighter than before. "I need urgent confirmation on a private vault authorization, code 849-203-615, presented by a minor, Obiora Ekwueme." A pause. Whatever was said on the other end made the color visibly drain from his face. "Confirmed, understood, immediately, sir." He hung up, straightened his jacket, and turned to Obiora with an entirely different expression than the one he'd worn 30 seconds earlier, something between disbelief and reverence. "Young Master Ekwueme," he said, "I am so sorry to have kept you waiting. Please, would you come with me?" "Is there a problem?" Emeka asked, stepping forward protectively. "No problem at all, sir. None at all." Fashola turned to his supervisor and said, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Inform the executive floor. Tell them the chairman's son is here."
Welcome to
If your heart just skipped like ours did, hit that subscribe button right now before we open this door, because what's behind it is about to change everything you thought you knew about this family. Subscribe and let's go in together. The elevator required a key card, a passcode, and finally a fingerprint scan that made even Emeka's eyebrows lift toward his hairline. They emerged into what Fashola called the executive foyer, a hushed, private space with none of the marble showiness of the lobby below, only understated wealth, art on the walls that looked older than the building itself, and a silence that felt expensive. "What is this place?" Obiora asked, unbothered, swinging his school bag. "This," Fashola said, "is part of the Ekwueme family's private holdings." "Ekwueme," Emeka repeated slowly, the surname landing differently now that it hung in this particular room. A second man joined them in the foyer, older, silver-templed, introduced only as Mr. Adaeze, head of private client relations. He studied Obiora for a long moment, the way a man studies something he has heard about for years but never actually seen. 11 years, Adaeze murmured, mostly to himself. 11 years we have managed this family's holdings, and I have never once laid eyes on the son. Chairman Ekwueme insisted on it, total privacy. No photographs, no public appearances, no board seats with his name attached. Half the finance desks in this city have written articles speculating whether he even exists. "He exists," Obiora offered helpfully. "He's washing Mummy's dress right now." Adaeze blinked, then laughed, a short, startled sound as though he hadn't laughed like that in some time. "Of course he is." "Sir," Fashola said carefully, "given the sensitivity, should we log this visit at the standard tier, or—" "Chairman-level discretion," Adaeze said immediately. "As always, nothing about this morning leaves this floor." Fashola led them through a final door into a private vault chamber lined with velvet-lidded cases, each one catching the light in a different way. "Your father said you may choose something for your grandfather's birthday. Is there anything here that catches your eye?" Tobina's eyes went wide with the pure, uncomplicated delight of a child who has just discovered the best toy shop in the world. "Those ones," he said, pointing. "The shiny ones." "An excellent choice, young master. How many would you like?" "Plenty." "Tobina," Emeka hissed, "you cannot put diamonds in your school bag like biscuits." "But Daddy said I should collect Grandpa's gift." "It's quite all right, sir," Fashola said smoothly, already gesturing to an assistant. "We'll have everything packed securely. Young master, would that be acceptable?" "Yes, thank you." Emeka, still slightly pale, leaned toward Fashola and asked quietly, "How much is all of this worth?" Fashola offered a small, careful smile. "I would strongly advise against asking that question, sir." By the time they finally arrived at the primary school gate, 40 minutes late, with a note from Fashola's office that would later cause considerable confusion in the school's front office, Tobina clutched his backpack a little differently than he had that morning, though he seemed entirely unaware of the shift in his own life's trajectory. He simply waved goodbye to Emeka and ran off toward his classroom, chattering about nothing at all, the way 5-year-olds do after the most consequential morning of someone else's year. The night before the party, long after Adaeze and Tobina had gone to sleep, Obiora sat alone on the balcony with a cup of untouched tea slowly going cold in his hands, looking out over the rooftops of Agudu toward the distant glow of the island, where a different version of his life had once nearly swallowed him whole. He thought of his father, Obiora Ekwueme, a man the newspapers used to call the Phantom Magnate, in the years before he vanished from public view entirely. A man who had built an empire out of shipping contracts and oil servicing deals in the space of 2 decades, and who had spent the last 10 years of his life surrounded by people who called themselves family, but circled him like men circling a carcass, waiting. Obiora remembered being 19, standing outside his father's hospital room while cousins he barely recognized argued in hushed, vicious tones about signatures and shareholdings, his father not yet even cold. He remembered a woman his father had once called the love of his life disappearing within a month of the estate reading, once it became clear that a particular clause had not gone in her favor. He remembered, most of all, the specific loneliness of being a young man that wealthy and never once being certain, not with a single person he met, whether he was loved or simply useful. He had made a decision in that season of grief that most people would have called foolish. He changed the way he dressed. He let his university friends drift away rather than correct their assumption that his family had lost everything after his father's death. He took the name Obiora, his middle name, and let Ekwueme sink quietly into the background of his identity, appearing only on documents that never crossed casual eyes. He hired people he trusted absolutely to run what needed running, and he built, deliberately and patiently, an entirely different kind of life, one measured in school runs and shared meals rather than shareholder meetings. And then he had met Adaeze, at a wedding neither of them had particularly wanted to attend, arguing over the last plate of small chops at the buffet table, and something in her refusal to be impressed by anyone, her insistence on paying for her half of everything on their very first outing, her complete indifference to the kind of man his family's history might have suggested he should be, had told him, with a certainty he'd never questioned since, that he had finally found the one person worth the risk of being fully known. He had never planned to hide it forever. He had simply been waiting for the right moment, or perhaps, if he was honest with himself, for a moment he could no longer avoid. Ife's cruelty had been building toward something for years. Chief Enwabara's birthday, with Kingsley Obiora conveniently seated at the table, had simply arrived first. He finished the cold tea, set the cup down, and went inside to check on his sleeping son, the box already packed and waiting by the door for morning. Saturday arrived dressed in gold balloons and the particular chaos of a Lagos family determined to outdo itself. Chief Augustine Enwabara's compound in Ikoyi had been transformed, a live band on one end of the lawn, a catering team the size of a small army, and enough Asoebi fabric to outfit a small nation. "Welcome, my family and friends," Chief Enwabara boomed from his seat of honor, resplendent in a cream and gold agbada, "to this celebration of another year the Almighty has given me." "To Papa," the family chorused, raising glasses, "long life and prosperity." Thank you all," he said, beaming. This is my family's pride." The gifts had already begun their procession. Douglas presented a car, the keys wrapped in a velvet ribbon, to enthusiastic applause. "Only the finest, Papa. You deserve it." "You people are spoiling me," Chief Enwabara said, laughing, clearly not minding in the slightest. Ife's younger sister, Grace, presented an imported wardrobe of vintage suits. Each one individually boxed. "Only the best fabrics for my father-in-law's father," she announced, though the joke landed awkwardly and nobody quite laughed. An uncle from the village presented a hand-carved walking stick, which Chief Enwabara accepted with far more genuine warmth than the car, running his thumb over the carved lion's head at its handle and calling it the only gift tonight made with actual hands and not just a bank transfer, a comment that drew nervous laughter from Douglas. A family friend, Barrister Nkemdiram, presented a framed portrait commissioned from a well-known Lagos artist, depicting Chief Enwabara in his youth, standing outside the modest provisions shop where his fortune had first begun. The old man went quiet for a moment, studying it, and for a second the performance of the evening slipped and something more tender showed through. Then it was Adaeze's turn. She stepped forward, Obiora beside her in his simple white kaftan, holding 2 wrapped bottles. "Happy birthday, sir," Obiora said quietly, extending them. "I wish you many more years of good health." Chief Enwabara accepted the bottles with 2 fingers, as though they might stain his hands, and examined the label with theatrical scrutiny. "Heritage Reserve," he read aloud. "If this is original, it isn't the worst thing you've ever brought me." "If it's original," Ife repeated, seizing the opening immediately. "There are fake bottles of that everywhere in this city, Papa. You never know." "So after everything," Grace added, unable to resist, "the great house husband managed only 2 bottles." "Grace," Adaeze warned. "I'm only asking a question." "Maybe he's been saving up for them," Douglas offered, not quite hiding his smirk. "Saving what? Adaeze's money," Ife said sharply. "Adaeze, tell me you didn't pay for your own father's gift and hand it to Obiora to present as his." "I didn't." "Then where did he find the money?" "Ife, must you know the details of every naira that moves through my marriage?" "I'm only asking." "Then stop asking." Chief Enwabara raised a hand, silencing the table with the ease of a man used to being obeyed. "Enough. It is my birthday. Let us see what else has been brought." His eyes lingered on the 2 modest bottles a moment longer, something unreadable passing behind them. "Heritage Reserve is not an easy thing to acquire, that much I will say." "Why does that matter, Papa?" Ife pressed. "It's still just 2 bottles." "Because," Chief Enwabara said slowly, setting the bottles down with unexpected care, "the distillery that makes this has not sold a single case to the open market in 6 years. Every bottle remaining is privately held. I would like to know exactly how my son-in-law came to be holding 2 of them." A murmur rippled through the gathered family. For the first time all evening, the mockery in the air had a crack of uncertainty running through it. It was at that exact moment, as if summoned by the question itself, that the gate at the far end of the compound began to slide open, and a convoy nobody had been expecting rolled quietly onto the property. 3 black SUVs, followed by a small security detail, followed by Tobina, walking proudly between 2 men in dark suits, carrying the black lacquered box that had occupied him so completely 3 days earlier. The band faltered. Conversation died in patches, spreading outward like a stain. "Daddy," Tobina called out, spotting Obiora across the lawn and running to him, entirely unbothered by the 300 stunned faces around him. "I brought it. Mr. Fashola said it's ready." Adaeze turned to her husband, and for the first time that evening, she saw something in his face she had never quite seen before, not nervousness, not pride, but a kind of quiet, weary readiness, the look of a man who has spent years choosing to be underestimated and has finally run out of reasons to keep choosing it. One of the security men stepped forward and addressed the entire gathering in a clear, carrying voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, please excuse the interruption. Chairman Ekwueme's office wished to ensure the delivery reached him personally, given the significance of the occasion." "Chairman," Ifi repeated faintly, as though the word had physically struck her. "Chairman who?" Obiora knelt down, took the box gently from his son's hands and walked it over to his father-in-law's table. He set it down, unlatched it, and opened the lid. Inside, nestled in dark velvet, sat a single flawless stone, larger than anything most of the guests had ever seen outside a jewelry advertisement, alongside a folded card bearing the crest of a private holding company that 3 people at that party, including Chief Enwabara himself, recognized instantly, because they had spent years quietly investing alongside it without ever once meeting the man behind the name. "This," Obiora said simply, "is what I wanted to give you, sir. I asked our son to help me collect it because I was traveling and couldn't retrieve it myself in time. I apologize if the timing caused any confusion." Chief Enwabara stared at the stone, then at the card, then, slowly, up at the son-in-law he had spent 5 years refusing to invite to his own birthday parties. "Ekwueme Holdings," he read aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. You are Chidi Ekwueme's son, the one who disappeared from public life 11 years ago." "I never disappeared," Obiora said. "I simply stopped needing anyone to see me." If loyalty means more to you than money, drop yes in the comments right now. And if this story moved you even a little, subscribe and share it with someone who needs the reminder. We're growing this community one story at a time, and we want you here for the next one. The silence that followed lasted long enough for the band to forget what song they'd been playing. "You run Ekwueme Holdings," Chief Enwabara said again, as though repeating it might make it real. "The oil and shipping conglomerate, the one that quietly holds a piece of half this city's infrastructure." "I inherited it," Obiora said. "I never asked for the attention that came with it. My father spent his whole life being paraded, being used, being loved for what he could give rather than who he was. When he died, men who had called themselves his friends fought over pieces of his estate before his body was even in the ground. I watched cousins stop speaking to each other over percentages. I watched people who claimed to love him disappear the moment the money became complicated to access." He looked around the compound, at Ifi's frozen expression, at Douglas's mouth hanging slightly open, at Grace clutching her wine glass like it might steady her. "I told myself that if I ever married, I wanted a woman who chose me before she knew any of this. Not my name, not my father's company, me." He turned to Adaeze. "You defended me to your family without knowing there was anything worth defending beyond what you already saw every day. You called me your weak man and meant it as the highest compliment a person has ever paid me. I have never once regretted staying quiet because it meant I finally knew for certain that what I had was real." Adaeze's eyes had filled, though she made no move to wipe them, too stunned to do anything but stare at the man she had married, the same man, and somehow an entirely different one, standing in front of her. "5 years," she said softly. 5 years of watching you get humiliated at every family gathering, and you let them because it never mattered what they thought of me," he said. "It only ever mattered what you did." Somewhere near the band, a young cousin who worked in investment banking was already whispering frantically into her phone, trying to explain to someone on the other end why she was suddenly standing 8 feet away from a man whose company's quarterly filings she had once spent an entire university thesis analyzing without ever seeing his face. Near the buffet, Barrister Nkemdirim quietly set down his plate, straightened his jacket, and began recalculating, with the swiftness of a man used to reassessing rooms, exactly how differently he ought to have addressed Obiora over dinner 2 Christmases ago. Chief Nwabara rose slowly from his seat, walked around the table, and for the first time in 5 years, extended his hand to his son-in-law, not as a formality, but as something closer to an apology. "I owe you more than a handshake," the old man said, his voice unsteady. "You owe me nothing, sir," Obiora said, shaking it anyway. "Adaeze is the one who never needed convincing. The rest of you were simply late to something she already knew." Across the lawn, Ife opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, finding, for perhaps the first time in her life, that she had nothing left to say. Tobina, oblivious to the weight of the moment, tugged at his father's sleeve. "Daddy, can I have cake now?" The tension broke into scattered, relieved laughter, and slowly, awkwardly, the party resumed around them, though nothing about the way this family looked at Obiora Ekwueme would ever quite be the same again. Douglas, to his credit, was the first to recover enough composure to approach. He extended a hand, his earlier bluster nowhere to be found. "I said some things I shouldn't have said, about charity. I'm sorry, Obiora." "You said what most people believe when they see a man doing quiet work instead of loud work," Obiora replied, shaking his hand without malice. "I'm not offended. I only hope you go home tonight and pick up a dish towel at least once before you decide again what makes a man useful." Grace, still pale, mumbled something about the wine going to her head and excused herself toward the buffet table. Kingsley Obiora, who had arrived 20 minutes earlier expecting an entirely different evening, quietly found his coat and slipped out through the side gate without saying goodbye to anyone, having correctly concluded that whatever he had been invited to negotiate was no longer available for discussion. Ife lingered longest, watching her sister across the lawn, something working behind her eyes that looked almost like grief for 5 years of a story she had gotten completely wrong. Finally, she crossed the grass and stood in front of Adaeze, smaller somehow than she had been an hour earlier. "I owe you an apology," she said. "A real one. Not tonight, not in front of everyone, but a real one properly when we're alone." "I'd like that," Adaeze said, and meant it, because 5 years of being underestimated together had taught her that grace, offered honestly, was worth more than an argument won. Later that night, as they drove home with a sleeping Tobina in the back seat, Adaeze reached over and laced her fingers through her husband's on the gearshift. "You could have told me," she said quietly, "any time in 5 years." "I could have," he agreed. "But I wanted a wife who loved a man who cooks and cleans and shows up every day, not a woman who loved a fortune that happened to come with a husband attached. Now I know, without a shadow of doubt, which one I have." "And which one is that?" He glanced at her, the streetlights sliding gold across his face. "The rare one." She laughed, really laughed, the sound of 5 years of quiet loyalty finally, publicly vindicated, and settled back into her seat as the city lights of Lagos rolled past the window, carrying them home. The following Wednesday, Ife came again, but this time she rang the doorbell instead of announcing herself from the gate, and she came alone, without Douglas, carrying nothing but a small paper bag of meat pies from the bakery Adaeze had loved since they were girls. Obiora answered the door, and for a long moment neither of them said anything. "Is she home?" Ife asked, quieter than Adaeze had heard her sister sound in years. "She's in the kitchen, come in." Ife stepped inside, glancing around the modest flat as though seeing it properly for the first time. The crayon drawings taped to the fridge, the worn but comfortable furniture, the smell of stew drifting from the kitchen. None of it changed by anything that had happened at the party, because none of it had ever needed to change. I keep thinking about what I said, she began, once Adaeze had joined them at the small dining table. About charity, about free food. I said those things because I genuinely believed I was protecting you from wasting your life on a man who couldn't provide. I was so certain I understood what a good marriage was supposed to look like that I never once asked what yours actually felt like from inside it. You didn't have to be certain, Adaeze said. You just had to trust me. I know that now. Ifi turned to Obiora, her hands twisting the paper bag in her lap. I called you a houseboy with a wedding ring, Obiora, in your own compound. I want you to know I don't believe that anymore, but more than that, I want you to know I shouldn't have believed it even before I found out who your father was. A man who shows up for his family every single day was never beneath anyone. I was the one who had it wrong, not you. Obiora accepted this quietly, the way he accepted most things, without needing to make her sit in her discomfort any longer than necessary. We're family, Ifi. That doesn't stop being true because you were wrong about something. Come and eat with us. Ifi's eyes went bright and she nodded quickly, pressing her sleeve briefly to her face before anyone could comment on it. Later, over jollof rice and the meat pies she'd brought, the three of them talked, really talked, without performance, for the first time in longer than either sister could remember. And by the time Ifi finally rose to leave, something old and brittle between them had begun, carefully to mend. The end.